Ethan Hale had always believed solitude was the clearest way to hear himself think. After years in the overcrowded colonies of Earth's former moons, he decided it was time to vanish. He wanted a place far from the chatter of other humans, far from politics, far from the constant surveillance and rules that weighed down daily life. When he discovered a small off-grid cabin on a little-known planet on the edge of settled space, he felt a spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. The property was inexpensive, surprisingly so, which made him suspicious at first. But the remote location, thick forests and unclaimed land were exactly what he had been searching for. He saw it as a chance to breathe freely, to finally be alone with his thoughts. The journey to the cabin had been long. Ethan had piloted his small shuttle through turbulent planetary weather and dodged natural hazards, navigating using star maps that were at least a century old. When he finally set foot on the land, the cabin stood quietly, almost as if it were hiding in the folds of the forest. Its wooden frame was reinforced, and the metal panels on the roof hinted at previous owners who valued security. Inside, dust coated the furniture, and the air smelled of damp wood and old metal. Ethan ran his fingers across the walls, appreciating their sturdy construction. Nothing about the cabin suggested recent habitation, yet something felt deliberate. After unloading his supplies, he spent the first few hours exploring the structure. The cabin was small, with a single living area, a loft bedroom, and a kitchen that still held a few old appliances. He switched on the generator, and the dim lights flickered to life. It hummed steadily, a comforting sound of life amid the isolation. Yet as Ethan walked through the cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Nothing moved. No shadows shifted. No wind passed through the sealed windows. It was an odd feeling, a whisper at the edge of his mind. While inspecting the floorboards, Ethan noticed one panel slightly raised, its edges worn differently than the surrounding wood. Curious, he pried it open, revealing a metal hatch. Beneath it, a ladder descended into darkness. His pulse quickened, not with fear but with curiosity. Most off-grid cabins didn't have hidden basements, especially in such a remote region. He reached for his flashlight and climbed down. The air was colder here, carrying a scent he didn't recognize, metallic, sharp, and faintly alive. The light illuminated a reinforced chamber, walls lined with metal panels, and in the center, a cage made of shimmering energy. Inside the cage lay a figure unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Muscular and towering, with elongated limbs and armor-like skin, the alien's features were sharp and predatory. Its eyes opened slowly, glowing faintly in the dim light, and it immediately fixed its gaze on Ethan. The warrior hissed, revealing rows of teeth, and flexed in defiance against the restraints. It was clear the creature was strong enough to break the cage if it were not for the technology holding it in place. Despite its aggression, there was something wounded in its posture, a weariness that spoke of long suffering and captivity. Ethan froze, unsure whether to retreat or step forward. The alien's reaction was almost immediate. It lunged, testing the cage with a force that made the energy panels ripple. Ethan jumped back, narrowly avoiding a strike that would have crushed him. He realized the danger he had stumbled upon was far greater than he had anticipated. Yet alongside the fear, he felt something else, a strange sense of responsibility. This creature was trapped, injured, and alone, much like he had once been, though in a very different way. He took a deep breath and spoke, his voice calm. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help." The alien's eyes narrowed, and it let out a growl that echoed off the metal walls. It had no reason to trust him. Captors often spoke words like that, and they had brought it to this cage. Yet Ethan did not flinch. He moved slowly to a storage compartment along the wall, taking out water and a small med kit he had brought for his own use. He set them near the cage, keeping his hands visible. The alien studied him cautiously, its chest rising and falling with a controlled intensity. muscles tensing and relaxing as if measuring the human's intentions. When Ethan administered basic first aid to the alien's forearm, which bore deep cuts from whatever battle had led to its capture, the creature recoiled at first. Pain and distrust were written in its posture, but Ethan did not stop. He worked deliberately, speaking softly, explaining each action in the simplest terms he could muster. Water, bandages, comfort. He offered it food, though it sniffed at it and rejected it, more interested in his movements than anything else. Hours passed. The alien neither attacked nor fled. It watched him with a mixture of suspicion and wariness. Ethan realized that the cage itself might have been more of a prison of fear than physical confinement. The creature had been through something unimaginable, yet it could still recognize, somehow, that he was not its captor. Ethan explored the control panel next to the cage and discovered the reason for its vulnerability. The energy barriers were failing. Power surges came in irregular bursts, and if left unchecked, the cage would either collapse or release the alien without control. Both outcomes were dangerous, but the first could mean the alien's death. He debated his options, knowing that tampering with alien technology carried enormous risk. Yet the thought of leaving this being to die was unbearable. His mind raced as he realized the truth. He was the only person here. The alien's fate rested in his hands. Finally, after careful consideration, Ethan made his choice. He began to disable the restraints manually, taking extreme care to avoid triggering defensive countermeasures. Sparks flew, panels hummed, and the alien's tense posture suggested it was ready to attack. Ethan moved slowly, calmly, ensuring every action signaled no threat. The alien flinched at each touch, yet did not strike. Minutes stretched like hours, until finally, with a shuddering sound, the cage's force fields flickered and went dark. The alien flexed its body, testing its freedom. Kathira, as she would later identify herself in broken common language, did not attack immediately. She observed Ethan closely, studying his every movement. Her body, honed for combat, was poised and alert, but there was no immediate aggression. She hissed softly, a sound of both warning and curiosity. Ethan met her gaze steadily, offering no sudden movements. For a moment, time seemed suspended between them, the quiet of the forest above and the silence of the cabin below amplifying the tension. Finally, Kathira spoke, her voice guttural but understandable in a rough approximation of human speech. "Why help?" The single question hung in the air, heavy with suspicion and disbelief. Ethan swallowed, unsure how to answer truthfully. "Because no one deserves to die alone, and I couldn't just leave you." Her eyes, sharp and calculating, narrowed as she processed this. Then she simply sat back, muscles relaxing fractionally, as though testing whether his words matched his actions. The first night in the cabin after freeing Kathira was tense. Ethan stayed near the ladder, observing her reactions. Kathira prowled the chamber, her senses alert to every sound and movement. She sniffed the air repeatedly, checking for hidden threats. Ethan realized that despite her apparent hostility, she was not an immediate threat to him. And yet every instinct he had screamed that he could not trust her completely, not yet. As he prepared to rest in the loft, Ethan's mind raced with questions. Who had captured her? Why here? Was the remote cabin a coincidence, or had someone placed her in this exact location for reasons he could not yet understand? And most pressing of all, could he protect himself if the hunters returned? Somehow, deep in the forest, he had stepped into a story much larger than himself, one that would test both his ingenuity and his courage. By the end of the night, Ethan had a quiet sense of determination. Kathira might have been dangerous, but he had proven something vital. Humans could act with empathy, even in the face of fear. He wondered whether the warrior below, with all her strength and skill, might someday recognize that humanity's quiet courage was a force in itself, one capable of surviving, even thriving, in a universe full of predators. When morning light filtered through the cabin windows, Ethan descended once more into the underground chamber. Kathira stood near the cage, or what remained of it, watching him carefully. This time, she did not hiss. Instead, her eyes flicked toward the forest above, aware of potential threats. Ethan realized that their survival depended not only on strength, but on understanding each other, on trust, however fragile, and the unique bond that could form when two beings from entirely different worlds faced danger together. The journey that began as a search for solitude had become something else entirely, a test of humanity, courage, and the surprising connections that could form between species. Ethan could not have imagined, as he stepped into the sunlight of his new home, that the quiet cabin he had sought for peace would soon become the front line of a story that would redefine both his life and the galaxy itself. The morning air carried a chill that seemed to seep through the cabin walls, but Ethan hardly noticed. His mind was restless, spinning with thoughts of the alien warrior he had freed the night before. Kathira, as she had introduced herself in broken but understandable words, had spent the night pacing the underground chamber. She had not slept in the way humans did, instead maintaining a constant awareness of the space around her. Her muscles twitched constantly, even when she rested, as if every nerve was alive with the memory of combat and captivity. Ethan, for his part, moved cautiously. He had learned that her strength was immense, but she was intelligent, able to reason, though through a lens shaped by violence and survival. He offered her water and food, carefully placing each item where she could see them but not mistake them for bait. Kathira sniffed at the offerings, testing their nature before finally taking a small portion. It was enough to show trust, or at least tolerance. "Hunters," Kathira muttered, her voice low, almost a growl, as she paced near the remnants of the energy cage. Ethan's heart tightened. "They come." "They might," Ethan admitted. "If someone built a cage like that, it wasn't for fun. Someone will be looking for you." Kathira's eyes narrowed, scanning the shadows of the chamber as if she could see beyond walls and metal. "They are fast. They do not hesitate. Kill first, ask later," Ethan swallowed. "We'll be ready." He meant it more than he realized. Already he had begun planning. The cabin was small, but the surrounding forest was dense and uneven. Natural obstacles could be turned into traps. Every fallen tree, every jagged rock, and every creek could be used to slow or mislead pursuers. He knew he had limited time. Kathira needed rest, repairs, and nourishment if she were to survive a confrontation with professional hunters. The first test came within hours. Strange movement in the forest caught Ethan's attention as he repaired a section of the cabin roof. Shadows flickered between the trees, too deliberate to be natural. He called down to Kathira, who immediately reacted, crouching like a predator ready to strike. The alien warrior's body was a study in controlled power. Even when partially fatigued from captivity, she radiated lethal potential. Ethan pointed to the trees, explaining what he saw. Kathira's gaze followed his gestures, scanning the perimeter. "Hunters?" she asked. "They could be, or it could be wildlife." Ethan knew better. The sensors in his shuttle had picked up unusual energy signatures in the area, ones that indicated tracking devices, not animals. "Either way, we need to be prepared." Kathira nodded, a flicker of respect in her eyes. "Humans fight differently. I have to, it's all I've got." Ethan's voice was calm, though his heart pounded. For the next several hours, Ethan worked tirelessly, fortifying the cabin while Kathira rested as best she could. He dug shallow trenches, placed hidden spikes along the most likely paths through the forest, and prepared tripwires with small explosive charges he had salvaged from old colony supplies. Kathira watched him, silent and observant, occasionally offering input with a word or gesture. Despite the language barrier, a strange rhythm formed between them. She would demonstrate potential weaknesses in his defenses with fluid movements, and he would adjust accordingly. By nightfall, Ethan had created a network of traps and barricades designed to buy time. Kathira, now fully awake and stretching her limbs, tested each area, leaping and bounding to ensure the terrain would work to their advantage. "Impressive," she said finally, voice low but firm. "You fight smart." Ethan smiled faintly. "Not a choice. Survival is the teacher." The first attack came at dusk. The forest around the cabin erupted in motion as shadowy figures approached, cloaked and armed with energy weapons. Ethan's trap slowed the first wave, triggering loud crashes and flashes of light that masked their exact positions. Kathira moved like a storm unleashed, her alien physiology giving her agility and strength beyond human capability. She struck with precise, devastating force, incapacitating the first hunters before they could even fire properly. Ethan watched, awed and terrified, as she fought. Her movements were beautiful in their violence, a choreography of lethal intent. Yet she did not kill indiscriminately. When hunters dropped incapacitated rather than dead, she moved on, focused on the next threat. Ethan realized something essential. She was a warrior with honor, capable of incredible destruction, but not blind cruelty. He picked off attackers who slipped past Kathira's strikes, using his knowledge of the cabin and his improvised weapons to keep them at bay. Together, they were a perfect combination of human ingenuity and alien power. Each moment tested their coordination, their understanding of each other, and their ability to trust instincts across species. After the first wave was repelled, Ethan and Kathira stood in the wreckage of the forest clearing. Fallen trees, sparks from destroyed traps, and stunned hunters littered the ground. Kathira's chest rose and fell with controlled effort, but there was a gleam in her eye, a recognition that humans could be more than fragile creatures. "You survive differently," she said, finally acknowledging his contribution. "Stronger than expected." Ethan nodded, brushing dirt from his jacket. "Humans adapt. We survive by thinking, not just by strength." They barely had time to recover before the second wave arrived. This time, the hunters were more cautious, moving deliberately and using sensors to detect traps. Ethan and Kathira adapted in turn. Kathira leapt between the trees, silent and fast, creating diversions while Ethan activated hidden defenses. Explosions flashed, alarms blared, and the forest became a battlefield of shadows and light. Amid the chaos, Ethan realized something unexpected. Kathira was watching him, not just for survival but for understanding. She observed how he positioned himself, how he calculated risks, how he decided which attacks to counter and which to avoid. She had fought countless enemies, yet this human impressed her. Not with raw power, but with foresight, cleverness, and the calm determination to act when every instinct screamed fear. Hours passed in a blur of movement, strategy, and peril. By the end of the night, the remaining hunters had either retreated or been incapacitated. Ethan and Kathira stood together amidst the wreckage, breathing heavily, their bodies battered but alive. They had survived not because of sheer strength alone, but because they complemented each other perfectly. Kathira looked at Ethan with a mixture of respect and curiosity. "You protect," she said simply, "even against stronger." Ethan gave a small shrug. "I don't want to die. And I don't want anyone else to die unnecessarily." For the first time, Kathira seemed to consider him differently, not just as a human, but as a potential ally, someone whose species had qualities she had not expected to encounter in her experience. There was intelligence, resilience, and, above all, a quiet courage that radiated in the most unassuming way. The night faded, leaving them exhausted but alive. Ethan tended to Kathira's minor injuries while she inspected the cabin and forest for remaining threats. Together, they reinforced the weakest points, using both human engineering and her alien strength to prepare for any future attacks. In these moments, a bond began to form, fragile but undeniable, built on trust, necessity, and mutual respect. By dawn, the forest was silent once more. The hunters had left, but Ethan knew they would return, stronger and smarter. He looked at Kathira and realized that their survival depended not just on preparation, but on their ability to continue working together. Humans alone might have failed, and Kathira alone might have been captured again. But together, they had become something greater than the sum of their parts. As Ethan watched the sunlight filter through the trees, he felt a sense of clarity he hadn't known in years. Solitude had brought him here, yes, but it was not loneliness that defined this place. It was connection. Connection with a being so different from himself that it defied logic. Yet in their shared fight for survival, he saw something profoundly human reflected in her eyes. Respect, courage, and the willingness to stand for life even when the odds were impossible. Kathira, standing silently beside him, seemed to understand as well. Her glowing eyes scanned the forest, alert for threats, but there was a hint of something softer beneath the predator's exterior. Recognition, trust, perhaps even a seed of gratitude. The cabin was no longer merely a refuge for a man seeking peace. It had become a fortress, a sanctuary, and the birthplace of an unlikely alliance, one that would shape not only their fate but the stories of all who might come after. The day stretched ahead, filled with unspoken questions. How had Kathira been captured? Who exactly wanted her alive or dead? And how far would they go to reclaim their prize? Ethan knew that answers would come, but for now, survival and preparation were paramount. Every decision mattered. Every step could mean life or death. And in the quiet, unclaimed forest, a human and an alien warrior stood together, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them in a galaxy that had never expected such an alliance to exist. For Ethan, the truth was undeniable. Humanity's strength was not measured solely by technology, weapons, or numbers. It was measured by courage, ingenuity, and the ability to act with honor even when the universe seemed bent on cruelty. And Kathira, fierce and formidable, had begun to understand that humans, though small and fragile in appearance, were forces to be reckoned with when guided by intellect and heart. The forest remained silent, but the winds carried distant echoes of the hunters, still out there, still searching. Ethan and Kathira prepared, side by side, knowing the next battle would come. And when it did, they would meet it together, human and alien, mind and muscle, strategy and strength. In this remote corner of the galaxy, a new chapter had begun, one that would test them both in ways they could not yet imagine, and reveal the untold potential of a human's courage when paired with a warrior from the stars. The morning mist hung low over the forest, curling around. The trees like a living thing. Ethan Hale stood at the edge of the clearing, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. His heart pounded with a mix of anticipation and dread. The attacks from the previous night had been a warning, one they could not ignore. Whoever had captured Kathira once would not give up so easily. The forest around the cabin was dense and uneven, perfect for hiding and ambushing, but even the best terrain could not guarantee safety. Kathira moved beside him, silent and poised. Her glowing eyes swept the surroundings with almost preternatural focus. The events of the last night had shown her something unexpected. Humans could be clever, adaptable, and willing to risk everything to protect another being. She had begun to recognize Ethan as more than just a fragile creature. He was a strategist, a thinker, a force in his own right. "We need to finish preparing," Ethan said quietly, breaking the silence. "They will come again, and next time they'll be smarter." Kathira nodded, stretching her powerful limbs before moving toward the cabin. Together, they reinforced the barricades, checked the traps, and set new defenses in places the hunters might least expect. Ethan had learned to move with purpose and calm, while Kathira moved with lethal precision, testing every weak point and marking areas that needed additional fortification. By mid-morning, the forest fell into an uneasy quiet. Ethan took a moment to catch his breath and glance at Kathira. Despite her alien appearance and fearsome strength, he noticed something almost human in the way she observed the world: curiosity, awareness, and a measured patience. He realized that trust, fragile as it was, had begun to grow between them. Their respite was short-lived. The first signs of the hunters came as subtle vibrations through the ground. Ethan froze, listening. Kathira's eyes narrowed and her body tensed like a coiled spring. Figures emerged from the shadows, moving with disciplined precision. They were better equipped than the last group, armed with energy rifles and protective armor that seemed almost organic in its design. The hunters had learned, adapted, and they were ready to reclaim their prize. Ethan signaled to Kathira, and they fell into position. The cabin and surrounding forest had been transformed into a labyrinth of traps, barricades, and hidden defenses. Ethan stayed behind the cabin, ready to trigger his improvised explosives and tripwires, while Kathira prepared to strike from above, using the trees as cover and launching sudden, devastating attacks. The battle began with a flash of light as one hunter tripped over a hidden wire, setting off a small explosion that sent him sprawling. Kathira leapt from a tree, her movements fast and precise, taking down two more attackers before they could react. Ethan activated a series of traps that sent spikes and barriers crashing into the hunters' path, forcing them to regroup. The hunters adapted quickly, splitting into smaller groups and attempting to flank their opponents. But Ethan had anticipated this. Hidden trenches and camouflaged pitfalls slowed them down, buying time for Kathira to strike with deadly accuracy. Her alien physiology gave her an advantage humans could never match: strength, speed, and agility that allowed her to move like a shadow, unstoppable and precise. Despite their overwhelming skill, Ethan realized that raw power alone would not win this battle. Strategy, timing, and collaboration were essential. He called out to Kathira, guiding her toward hunters who had bypassed the initial traps. Together, they formed a seamless partnership, Ethan thinking several steps ahead, Kathira executing with near-perfect precision. The hunters were formidable, but their confidence began to waver as their numbers dwindled. One by one, they fell into the traps or were incapacitated by Kathira's strikes. Ethan managed to avoid direct combat, instead using his environment and clever devices to control the battlefield. He watched in awe as Kathira moved with a lethal grace that seemed almost choreographed. Hours passed in a blur of motion, noise, and controlled chaos. Ethan and Kathira fought side by side, covering each other's weaknesses, exploiting the hunter's mistakes, and turning the forest into a deadly arena. The alien warrior's respect for the human before her grew with each passing moment. He was not just clever, he was fearless in the face of overwhelming odds, willing to risk his life for someone else. By nightfall, the last of the hunters had either been captured or fled into the forest, leaving behind only the echoes of their retreat. The clearing was a mess of broken weapons, spent energy cartridges, and the occasional unconscious figure. Ethan and Kathira stood amidst the wreckage, breathing heavily but alive. They had survived not because of strength alone, but because of intelligence, strategy, and trust. Kathira regarded Ethan with glowing eyes, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and measured. "You protect, you survive, not weak like others." Ethan wiped sweat from his brow and gave a small shrug. "We did it together." Humans survive by thinking and sometimes by caring about someone else. That's what makes us strong. Kathira studied him, a flicker of something almost like admiration passing across her features. For the first time since her captivity, she seemed to understand a new kind of strength, one that was not based solely on combat or power, but on intelligence, courage, and the willingness to act with honor. The aftermath of the battle left the forest scarred but quiet. Ethan and Kathira worked together to repair the cabin, reinforce the traps, and ensure no other hunters could easily return. In the process, they shared small moments of connection, exchanging words, gestures, and even smiles. Though their bond was built on necessity, it was also founded on mutual respect and understanding. Over the next several days, Ethan and Kathira explored the surrounding forest, scouting for signs of remaining threats and ensuring their home was secure. They shared knowledge, Ethan teaching Kathira human tactics and environmental strategies, Kathira demonstrating alien combat techniques and survival skills. Each learned from the other, their partnership growing stronger with every shared experience. One evening, as the sun set and painted the forest in shades of gold and red, Ethan sat on the cabin steps while Kathira stretched nearby. He reflected on everything that had happened, the solitude he had sought, the unexpected discovery of a fierce alien warrior, and the bond they had formed in the crucible of battle. He realized that solitude was not what he had truly desired. What he had needed was connection, purpose, and the opportunity to make a difference. Kathira approached him, her glowing eyes softer than usual. "You, human, different, not weak, brave, clever, I trust." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth he hadn't known in years. "Thank you, Kathira. I trust you too, more than I ever expected to trust anyone or anything." In the quiet that followed, they sat together, sharing the moment of calm after the storm. The forest around them was alive with distant sounds, but here, in this cabin, they had carved out a place of safety, mutual respect, and shared purpose. They had faced danger together and emerged stronger for it, proving that even in a vast and often hostile universe, courage, intelligence, and compassion could create an unbreakable bond. As the days turned into weeks, Ethan and Kathira continued to prepare for any threats, always improving their defenses and strategies. Yet, there was more than just survival in their partnership. They had discovered something deeper, the ability to inspire and learn from one another, bridging the gap between species and experiences. In doing so, they demonstrated a fundamental truth about humanity: that true strength is measured not only in muscle and skill, but in courage, ingenuity, and the willingness to act with honor and empathy. Their story, quiet and unassuming at first, became a testament to the unexpected ways life could unfold. A human seeking solitude had found a warrior from the stars, and together they had faced impossible odds. Together, they had survived, adapted, and grown stronger. The cabin, once a symbol of isolation, had become a fortress, a classroom, and a home, a place where two very different beings had discovered the power of collaboration, trust, and the enduring spirit of humanity. And as the night settled over the forest, Ethan and Kathira stood side by side, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The hunters might return, the galaxy might remain dangerous, but they had proven one undeniable truth: when humans act with intelligence, courage, and empathy, they are forces to be reckoned with. And when allies unite across worlds, no challenge is insurmountable. In the end, Ethan realized something profound. Solitude had led him here, but it was not the end he had sought. What he had found was far greater: a partnership that transcended species, a purpose that strengthened the human spirit, and a living proof that humanity's quiet courage could shape the galaxy in ways others never expected. Kathira, fierce and unstoppable, had come to see the same truth. Together they were no longer hunter and hunted, human and alien. They were a team, bound by respect, trust, and the shared will to survive and thrive. The forest was still, the cabin secure, and for the first time in his life, Ethan felt truly at peace. Not because he was alone, but because he was not. And in that understanding lay a strength far greater than any weapon or technology: the unyielding spirit of humanity, tested and proven in the heart of the galaxy.